Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, this is Brenda J. Since we have listeners from all over the world, we'd like to provide information on how to access domestic violence resources in other countries. Sarah McDougall has a free app that is safer than going to a website because it does not leave a browser trail. It includes verified resources in over 200 global regions. Please use caution, especially if you have shared devices with your abuser. The reason is they may be able to see your web browser history. The Trauma Mamas app, it's called Trauma Mamas. This app is available on Google Play and the App Store. And that is traumamamas.app/links. And I will include the link to the app in the show notes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today we have Amy and Emily on the podcast. Amy is an advocate for the city of Mesa and Emily for the town of Gilbert. And they also collaborate with Winged Hope Advocacy Center, which, as Karen and I do work a lot with them as well. So we'd just like to welcome you to the show, ladies.
Thank you so much for having us.
So we just wanted to talk to our listeners for a moment and just let you know this is important information, very educational, to use it if it doesn't apply to you, to just use it as a safe resource for others if needed. Okay, first we want to give a safety alert. We want you to make sure that your phone and computer you're using are in a safe location and it's not being monitored by your partner. Make sure all passwords are secure and safe. You may delete this podcast immediately after listening, and if it has been sent to you, you can access it again by going back into the Hanging On to Hope podcast. And if you're in danger, call 911 immediately.
So what exactly is a safety plan?
Yeah, a safety plan is a set of actions that can help lower your risk by being hurt by your partner. RAINN states that safety planning is about brainstorming ways to stay safe that might also reduce the risk of future harm. It can include planning for future crises, considering your options, and making decisions about your next steps. It includes information specific to you and your life that will increase your safety at home, school, and other places that you may go on a daily basis. Safety plans can help you anticipate the dangers that you may face. Just as abusers continually shift their tactics of power and control, your safety plan is an adaptable tool to help increase your safety in your ever-changing situation.
All right, now we're going to talk about when to use a safety plan. Amy, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, of course. I think a safety plan can be used in a number of situations, but it's really taking a moment of clarity to plan for emergencies instead of having to navigate that in the crisis of the moment. So thinking in advance makes it easier to act in emergencies. So a safety plan can be made in a variety of situations for dealing with an emergency, such as when you are threatened with physical abuse or an assault has occurred, for continuing to live with or date a partner who has been abusive, or for protecting yourself after you've ended a relationship with an abusive partner.
For more information on safety planning, listen to episode 114, Creating a Safety Plan.
So now we're going to discuss safety planning regarding an order of protection, like our restraining order. Do you want to get into that, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting a protective order can be an important part of safety planning when preparing to leave. Even if you get a protective order, it's really important still look at other safety planning steps to keep you and your children safe. We talk about this often as it's just a piece of paper, which sounds like a negative way to frame an order of protection. And we don't mean it to be negative or mean it to be scary. We just want to really help people understand that it's a legal tool in our toolbox. It's a way to hold some abusers accountable if they continue to contact in violation of a protection order, but it doesn't offer any sort of physical safety. It's not changing a lock or setting up a security camera. So it's one tool in your toolbox as you're looking at a complete safety plan. A legal protective order is not always enough to keep you safe. And you can locate in your state under the restraining order section of many different websites, including the National Domestic Violence Hotline website, to look at information of how to get a restraining order in your jurisdiction. And while a restraining order might not necessarily keep you safe, it can help, especially if an abuser thinks that they have a reputation to protect, they respect or fear that the police may arrest them, or they have a fear of going to jail. But it can also have a counter effect. It can make the abuser angrier and more dangerous, especially if there's a criminal history, that person's unemployed, already stalking someone, or not afraid of police ramifications such as an investigation or going to jail. So it's really important to talk that through with your community or your advocate and weigh those decisions as you move forward. It's a very helpful tool, but it's not a good fit for every situation. And then moving forward, if the restraining order or the order of protection is violated, if the abuser contacts you and that's not allowed, or has firearms and that's not allowed, or shows up at a protected address, police are able to arrest that person for violating the court order. And that can be a separate charge each time that it's reported and investigated. And if I don't have a restraining order, I can go through the family court system. And this question comes up for people a lot. Can go through the family court system to try to find other ways for protection of children. This is a great place to get some legal advice as well. Most victim advocates have lots of information on safety planning and a good overview of the criminal justice system, but no victim advocates are able to give legal advice. And so when it starts getting to the point of civil matters or family court, it can be really helpful to have a legal advice, legal resource so that they can talk through things like temporary custody, how to file those types of paperwork with different courts, and can be very helpful moving forward.
Did you want to talk about the following steps to help enforce an order of protection?
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I think is really important to acknowledge is that an order of protection is not enforceable until it's been served upon the defendant. And so I get a lot of questions about that at the court, where victims have the paper in hand and they're like, great, this is really helpful. I'm going to go and start calling in violations right now because he's calling me, texting me right now, even while I'm in your office. And it's important to acknowledge that this order of protection needs to be served before it's enforceable, but the court will usually always give a survivor an emergency copy. So if the defendant puts you in a situation where, let's say, for example, you go home and the defendant gets there and he hasn't been served yet, call 911. Those officers who respond will serve the order upon the defendant and they'll remove him, because once he's been served, he cannot have contact with you. So just acknowledging that this document, which again, at the end of the day is only a piece of paper. I know Emily has already mentioned that, and the judges mention it in our court every single day. It does not physically stop someone who has the capacity to hurt or harm you in any way, but it does provide accountability for someone who violates a healthy boundary every single day. And that behavior is something that should be taken very seriously. And the severity of consequences can only increase for a defendant as they continue to pick up violations after violations after violations. And it's important to know that even friendly contact in an order like this, if judge orders that this person should not have any contact with you because they are not a safe person for you to have contact with, even friendly contact could be a violation of that order. So if it feels right, continue to call law enforcement every single time, because a lot of abusers will take that moment of, oh, hey, how are you doing? Just checking in on you. If it feels right and you want to report it, you can report even friendly contact.
Yeah, I think something to highlight is if a protection order gets lost or destroyed, you can request another one through the county courthouse or law enforcement to get another copy to keep on hand to have like in your purse or your backpack to carry with you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And making as many copies as you want. I've had victims ask me, well, hey, does this have to be a certified copy? Does it have to have like a raised seal from the court? And the answer to that question is no. You can make as many copies of the order of protection as you want. So that way, if one does get destroyed or one gets lost or whatever, you can make literally hundreds of copies if you need to.
And who should we give the copies to? The police? And then just make sure you have some for yourself? Ideally,
law enforcement would already have a copy of this, especially in the state of Arizona. There's a portal called Arizona AZ Point. And so it's an online portal where law enforcement can access orders of protection, so they can hop on and see when you got it, when it was served, because if it hasn't been served yet, then it's not enforceable, right? So ideally, they should have access to that electronically. However, that's in an ideal world, right? But that's why the court will give you that emergency copy, because a lot of times what we find is that victims will come and they'll get the order of protection and then they'll need to use it right away. So if the defendant puts you in a situation where they come back to the home, they're stalking you in a grocery store parking lot, they're not supposed to be there, call 911 right away. If he hasn't been served yet, they'll serve him and remove him.
That's a great point, Amy. And AZ Point is a really helpful resource in Arizona. Most states are building something like that if they don't already have it. There is a slight time delay that's sometimes frustrating for victims and survivors as far as the court loading the petition and the order into AZ Point in Arizona. So there's sometimes a few hour to sometimes even up to 24-hour delay in law enforcement being able to see that. So that's why it's great if people have their copy or make some copies in case they have an interaction within those first 24 hours. And then past that, typically anybody with the police department should be able to pull up that order and assist with service if they need to. And if you find police don't do an arrest for violating an order, you can have a conversation and request of that officer why that's not being considered a violation. They may be able to give you information on things like probable cause on why that didn't happen and give you information on how to report that differently in the future. But you're also able to ask to speak to that person's chain of command. So if you have concerns and you would like to address any concerns with law enforcement, you can request to speak to that person's sergeant or address those concerns appropriately through the police department so that they can help you move forward with investigating those violations and prosecuting those violations.
Yeah, and just make sure that you tell your friends, your church leader, your employer, and just other family members that you have the order of protection, which is what I did when I had mine. And you just have to let them know.
Yeah, that's, part of identifying who that trusted network of supporters is for you at the very beginning, because you're going to collect a lot of documents and a lot of contact information and a lot of resources. So being able to identify those people from the very beginning, and as you start collecting these resources and these documents, to be able to share them with people that you know and trust. Like we mentioned, maybe disclosing to your employer, because that's one of the first places that an abuser might go to find you, because they know exactly when you're going to be there, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And then also, I think reporting violations. I've had some victims say, well, how does law enforcement know when the defendant is violating this order? And so it's empowering to remember that the victim, the survivor, the person, the plaintiff of the order of protection is the person who's calling law enforcement to alert that this person is violating the order. Hey, he's outside my apartment right now. Hey, he's outside my work right now. Hey, he's using a friend or family member to pass messages along to me as a way to manipulate the system. In many cases, even third-party contact is a violation of a court order. So if he's passing messages along to you like, hey, Emily, can you tell Brenda XYZ? That could be a potential violation as well.
That's a great point. And also encouraging people to call 911 if the person is a safety risk or in person trying to have contact. But you are also able to utilize non-emergency numbers. So if you get a text message or an email that violates your order of protection, I really encourage you to screenshot that, email it to yourself. Again, time and date stamps can be very helpful from an evidence and investigation perspective. And then calling the non-emergency line and figuring out how you can submit that information so that violation can be investigated, and really encourage you to do that each and every single time. It can be really frustrating for victims and very time consuming, but it can be helpful on holding that person accountable through the justice system.
I don't know if we want to take this deep of a dive into orders of protection too, but I think it might be important to safety plan around defendants having the right to contest orders too. So when we're talking about the importance of saving and retaining evidence, anytime that a defendant is served with an order of protection, they will also be read their rights and responsibility. And one of their rights is that they have the right to contest the order. Yeah. This order is granted while they were not present, and the judge is taking a victim or survivor's word for it that these acts of violence did in fact happen. But they will also extend the defendant the opportunity to defend himself in court. So they will ask that both the plaintiff and the defendant appear in court to present both sides of the story to the judge. And that's where the physical evidence can be really helpful in making sure that that protective order remains in place. So retaining the screenshots of the defendant threatening, harming, harassing you, the security camera footage of the defendant violating the order of protection time after time after time, voice recordings where the defendant is calling and saying, hey, all of these violent, harassing things, it can be really important to retain them, because a lot of our first impulses are to delete them because they're disgusting and we don't deserve to be treated that way. But they can be really helpful in demonstrating to the court just how unsafe this person is to be around. Mm-hmm. So they will have the right to contest it, and they can contest it anytime during the duration of that court order. In Arizona, an order of protection is valid after it's been served for 2 years when it is against someone that you have a biological or romantic or domestic relationship with. For a stranger that you don't have that type of relationship with, it would be for a year, but the defendant can contest it at any time during that year or the 2 years.
That's a really great point. And another thing to keep in mind, any evidence that you'd like to bring to the court, you have to be able to provide and leave with the court. So if you have screenshots of text messages or you have emails, if you have audio, if you present that and you bring your cell phone, they would have to take your cell phone as evidence if it's all retained on there. So you can put screenshots and audio on a flash drive. You can put it on a flash drive, thumb drive, whatever you call it, burn it on a CD like people used to do in the early 2000s if you feel like it. You can print stuff off, but just having tangible things that you can leave and provide for the court. They're going to call them exhibits and they have to be able to take things from you if there's a contested hearing so that they can retain that as evidence. And you can speak with an advocate about that, printing stuff off at the library, a friend's house, places that you have permission to make sure that you have that available to bring with you. And again, this is a little bit of a deep dive and I'm sorry, but I get lots of questions from victims and survivors about civil standbys. That can be very confusing for people.
Yeah.
So after a protective order is served to the abuser is able to call 911 and ask for a police escort to go back to the home to collect some of their personal belongings, even if you've been granted exclusive use of the property. It's a one-time opportunity for them to be able to go get simple items like clothing and toiletries and maybe personal documentation, but it's small things. And typically an officer will go with them and supervise them for about 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes as much as 20, for them to collect small items. And then everything else would have to go through a civil process past that. And they shouldn't be able to come more than once. So if they try to, you can definitely call law enforcement or go back to the court and let them know that that's been a problem. And then if you live with somebody and you don't have exclusive use of the property, you're also able to request that civil standby. So you could ask for the opportunity, you could call law enforcement and say, hey, there's an order of protection that's been put in place, but I need to go collect my things and request that civil standby after the order of protection's in place. And if you have any questions on that, advocates and law enforcement, non-emergency lines, teleserve desks, they're very well versed on civil standbys, so they will be able to help with questions. Something to keep in mind with a civil standby too, officers aren't able to help with anything as far as dispute because it's civil rather than criminal, so they can't designate what someone's able to take and not able to take. So again, having your personal documentation like your social security card, your birth certificate tucked away someplace safe, or items that you want to make sure that belong to you and are your property, or maybe out of the way when somebody comes to pick up their items, that can be helpful and a little less stressful in that, half an hour time frame.
Yeah. So if I ever had it violated, you just call the police and then I let my lawyer know. And then if they don't arrest him, does that ever happen? If they don't arrest him for violating the order, I will call my domestic violence advocate, my attorney, or my counselor and file a complaint with the chief of the police department.
It's usually a good idea to start with the officer and then work up the chain of command and have that conversation on the levels as you go. It's also very helpful to have conversations about why wasn't this person arrested? Was there not probable cause? Was there something that wasn't met as far as the requirements? Because the legal system is so challenging. Those of us that do this every single day, I don't know about Amy, but I have a new question every single week for somebody different. There are so many things that change and update. Orders of protection just this year went from being 1 year to 2 years.
Yeah.
We now have lifetime injunctions. There's all these exciting and interesting things that happen that change in legislation. And so we're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving. So it might be that there was misinformation on one side or another, and having some really good conversations and finding out what happened can help people move forward really productively and hopefully minimize a lot of frustration.
Yeah. In my experience, most often when victims call me and let me know that law enforcement is not enforcing the court order, a lot of times the officers are saying, well, hey, you texted him first. And this court order is a black and white court order, and it only works one way. So if you are getting that type of pushback from an officer, I encourage you to reach out to their supervisor and say, hey, this is a court order that says he's not supposed to have any contact with me. That being said, if you need to have contact with the defendant, then I would recommend going back to the court and having it stipulated in the agreement. There are many reasons where you might need to have contact with that person. For example, if you have children with them, have it built into the document so it does not compromise the enforceability of the document. For example, I only want text message communication with the defendant, and I only want it about the children. So that way it's really easy to document. So when he's text messaging you saying all of these terrible or disparaging things, you can screenshot it and you can show that to an officer and say, hey, yes, I did initiate contact with him, but it was for a legitimate purpose. And then this is what his response was. My communication to him is purposeful. It has a reason. It's productive. His contact to me was threatening, harming, and harassing. So if having contact is compromising the enforceability of your order, maybe go back to the court and have it modified. Ask for a modification of your order so that it works better for your scenario. Every order is going to be different. It's going to be different for many, many people. And it's super complicated, especially for folks who have children in common with their abuser. So just know that there is flexibility even in that document, but that's most often when I see people getting pushback from law enforcement.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. You can ask for many different things on that order. It will ultimately be up to the judge what they grant, but you could ask to only talk about the kids. You could ask to only talk about household finances until you work through a divorce. You could even specify what types of communication you're comfortable with. So phone calls, emails, or text messages. In my experience, I encourage people to do written forms of communication as much as possible, just because it's easier to document typically than voice conversations. But if you're comfortable recording things, if there's any sort of negative or outside the bounds of your order of protection communication, that can work great too. So you can ask for anything that is a good fit for your safety on that order of protection.
Yeah, that's what I did.
With orders of protection, sometimes they are very helpful if you want to get one within the first couple of days, because release conditions are only put in place for a certain amount of time. And so if someone's arrested on a Monday, they go to their initial appearance on a Tuesday and they plead to the court that same day, their release conditions are no longer going to be in effect. And so I think sometimes victims have a false sense of security based on information that they might receive on the front end, that there will be release conditions in place. But depending on if the case is a misdemeanor or felony and how the case proceeds through the court system, the order of protection can be really important as an overall safety feature.
Wow. And another thing, I don't know if we mentioned, but you can do, because nowadays you can do the order protection online.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to be,
yes.
You don't have to just be in person.
Yeah, we forgot to mention that.
Yeah, that's
so. How do they do that?
Easy Point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would just say with Easy Point, they will do demographic information first. The first 4 pages is going to be the abuser's information, their information. They're asking for that information so that they can hopefully locate the abuser. So it'll be like the days and times that they work, what their home address is, if they know their driver's license or vehicle number, estimated date of birth. The more information they can share, great. It's a little bit faster, but law enforcement is able to look up a lot of that too. So just encouraging people not to be very stressed out about what they can include and what they can't. However, Easy Point has a very bad habit of timing out. And they have added a button on the top right-hand side that says save as you go. And it is sometimes helpful and it is sometimes very glitchy. So to save on frustration and to cut down on the amount of time that you're spending typing up a petition, I really recommend that somebody types up incidents on their phone or on a Word document on the computer, a safe device, either with an advocate or a friend or family member. Because if the application and the petition times out, you lose all of your work up until where it had saved last. And the incident part's really time consuming. And I've had people be like, I'm not starting over. This is ridiculous that it crashed on me. I don't have time for this today. And then they may or may not come back to it. And so I've noticed that's the biggest barrier. It's great that it's online. I think it's an awesome work in progress, but that would be my only complaint about that system.
And it's Easy Point just for Arizona?
Yes.
Easy Point is just for Arizona. Yeah.
Oh, Easy Point. So in other states, they would just, how would they know how to do it online? Just ask the DV hotline maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or even start by just contacting court. So protective orders are available from justice courts, superior courts, municipal courts. So just picking up the phone and calling a court, Google whatever court is closest to you and say, hey, how do I get a protective order? If they have an online tool, great. If not, you should be able to walk into a court and get a paper copy of a petition, fill it out right there while you're at the court and meet with the judge.
Yeah.
Something else to keep in mind in Arizona, if you have any family court matters, divorce, child custody, temporary custody, you're required to go to a superior court, file for your order of protection. It's been explained to me that it's to keep everything under the same umbrella within the same court system. If you don't have any children in common or any family court matters, you can go to any court, justice, municipal, superior, whatever's closest to you to request your order of protection. And then if you have a contested hearing or you want to request a modification, you can go back to that same courthouse. Contested hearings are going to be based on whether or not your residence was in common prior to the order of protection going into place. And Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's still within 5 to 7 business days if they shared a residence, and it can be up to 10 if they did not share a residence. So you're going to want to make sure that the court has an active phone number and an active email address, because once they notify you, that hearing is going to go forward with or without your presence. And if you don't go to that hearing, the order will be automatically dismissed. And so if you need support or resources around preparing for your contested hearing, having somebody go with you and be available, victim advocates are typically available through all agencies, and then community advocates are also able to attend with you.
Okay, so in the case of order protection or restraining order, what are some of the things that family members, friends, or advocates can or should do to help in that situation?
They can assist them with making copies of it and keeping it in a safe location for them, keeping the original with the victim and giving copies of a protection order to the police department in the areas where they visit friends, family, where they live and work can be helpful. In the state of Arizona, we have a system called AZ Point that tracks all of the protective orders. And once the court system sends that into AZ Point within 24 hours, that will be something that law enforcement across the entire state can see. So you could also ask your court or law enforcement in your area if that's something that they'll be able to automatically see, or if it'd be helpful for you to submit those in hard copy form. Helping them or reminding them to tell employers, church leaders, family, friends, and others about the protection order. Reminding them that if the protection order gets destroyed or lost, they could go to the courthouse or law enforcement and request another copy. You could be there and help if the abuser violates the protection order, to assist in calling police and doing a report, and assist with things like calling their lawyer, advocate, counselor, and or courts to assist with reporting about the violation. You can also remind them that if they need any assistance with clarification on why arrests might not be made, they can address concerns through the chain of command with police. So if the officer doesn't make the arrest, they can ask questions about why that didn't happen, if it didn't meet the parameters or have probable cause. They can ask to speak to that person, sergeant or lieutenant, and they can definitely talk with people like victim advocates, attorneys, and counselors to seek some clarification and assistance on those situations as well. You can remind and assist them on filing any complaints they might have across any area of the criminal justice system. And you can let them know that they are able to call 911 and ask for a police escort to go back to the home and get some of their belongings, typically called a civil standby. If their abuser was granted use of the home, or it's not a place that they're on the lease or on the mortgage, they can request to go get those belongings. On the opposite side of that, if they receive a protective order and they were granted exclusive use of the home, the abuser may have an opportunity to request a civil standby to come for a brief window of time with supervision from law enforcement to gather some of their belongings. So as a friend or family member, it might be really helpful to be supportive for them during that time. If it's safe for you, you could be there to support them. You could be away from the property. You could be on the phone with them or be texting back and forth with them. So there's a lot of ways that you could support them through that time period.
Yeah, and this is listed in 65 countries. So I know Sarah McDougall has lists for domestic violence resources and those type of resources for, I forget how many countries, but all over the world. So if anybody else is listening from one of these other countries, I think the resources are different wherever you go. So yeah.
Yeah. Every state is different. Sometimes every county is different. Sometimes every court is different.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So anything else that we might have forgot?
I mean, I'm sure there's so much. I think if there's one takeaway from this podcast, I would just say, try to get connected to a local agency in your community, because there is a lot of support. There is a lot of resources. You are not alone. There is someone that can help, and they may be thinking about things that you're not even considering. So just, if you can, connect with a local domestic violence support agency. They can really help to take some of the burden off of all of this stuff, because it's super overwhelming. Yeah. But they specialize in this. They do it day in, day out. So just reach out to your community if you can.
And any last thoughts, Emily?
I completely agree with Amy. I think that'd be a great ending point. Like, that's perfectly put. So
Okay.
And then anyone like outside of Arizona, they can just Google, like domestic violence hotline. We've already given that number, but they can Google like any of those services.
Yeah. And I really like that the domestic violence hotline is a really easy acronym to remember. So in a moment of crisis, just remember 1-800-799-SAFE.
So is there any other important information that you wanted to add to that?
Abuse is never your fault. The person who's causing the harm is responsible for their own choices, behaviors, and consequences. And I am always here to support you and care about you and how you move forward. And so
Yes, absolutely. It's very important for them because usually they're made to feel like it's their fault or something. So that's very important to stress. Yeah.
Right. Love should never hurt, and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for coming on to the podcast. Where can someone find you if they wanted to reach out, or who can they contact to get started on their safety plan?
I think if you live locally, the best thing to do is to just Google domestic violence support organizations in your area. I'm personally located at the Mesa Municipal Court with victim services, and a Google search of City of Mesa Victim Services would lead you to myself or one of my colleagues, all who are very capable of starting a safety plan with you.
Great.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. Lots of community-based organizations are great, and if it's safe for you to Google them, that's a good place to start. Amy's department is incredible. We collaborate quite often, and I appreciate them. Most court systems and police departments have advocates embedded that are able to assist. And if someone wanted to reach me personally, I am with the Gilbert Police Department. You could call our non-emergency line. Also, something you can Google, but it's 480-503-6500 and request a referral to victim services, and they'd be able to get you over to us as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much for the work and the commitment that you have to the community. I think that this is such a wonderful thing that you guys are doing and will be really helpful to get that information out. So thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you guys. Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.